The theology of the Phoenicians. From Sanchuniatho the cosmology, he supposes that the beginning of all things was a dark and condensed windy air, or a breeze of thick air, and a chaos turbid and black as Erebus, and that these were unbounded, and for a long series of ages destitute of form. But when this wind became enamored of its own first principles, the chaos, and an intimate union took place, that connection was called pothos, 17, and it was the beginning of the creation of all things. And it, the chaos, 18, knew not its own production, but from its embrace with the wind was generated mot, which some call ilus, mud, but others the putrefaction of a watery mixture. And from this sprung all the seed of the creation, and the generation of the universe. And there were certain animals without sensation, from which intelligent animals were produced, and these were called zophasmen, that is, the overseers of the heavens, and they were formed in the shape of an egg, and from mot shone forth the sun, and the moon, the less and the greater stars. And when the air began to send forth light, by its fiery influence on the sea and earth, winds were produced, and clouds, and very great defluxions and torrents of the heavenly waters. And when they were thus separated, and carried out of their proper places by the heat of the sun, and all met again in the air, and were dashed against each other, thunder and lightnings were the result, and at the sound of the thunder, the before-mentioned intelligent animals were aroused, and startled by the noise, and moved upon the earth and in the sea, male and female. After this our author proceeds to say, these things were found written in the cosmogony of Taordus and in his commentaries, and were drawn from his observations and the natural signs which by his penetration he perceived and discovered, and with which he has enlightened us. Afterwards, declaring the names of the winds Notus, Boreas, and the rest, he makes this epilogue: but these first men consecrated the productions of the earth, and judged them gods, and worshipped those things upon which they themselves lived, and all their posterity, and all before them, to these they made libations and sacrifices. Then he proceeds, such were the devices of their worship in accordance with the imbecility and narrowness of their souls. Euseb. Priap, Evan. Libai, c. 10. The generations of the wind Calpias and his wife Bau, which is interpreted night, were begotten two mortal men, Aeon and Protagonus so called, and Aeon discovered food from trees. The immediate descendants of these were called Genus and Genia, and they dwelt in Phoenicia, and when there were great droughts they stretched forth their hands to heaven towards the sun, for him they supposed to be God, the only Lord of heaven, calling him Beelzebub, which in the Phoenician dialect signifies Lord of heaven, but among the Greeks is equivalent to Zeus. Afterwards by Genus the son of Aeon and Protagonus were begotten mortal children, whose names were Phars, Per, and Phlox. These found out the method of producing fire by rubbing pieces of wood against each other, and taught men the use thereof. These begat sons of vast bulk and height, whose names were conferred upon the mountains which they occupied, thus from them Cassius and Libanus and Antilibanus and Brathu received their names. Memrumus and Hypsiranius were the issue of these men by connection with their mothers, the women of those times, without shame, having intercourse with any men whom they might chance to meet. Hypsiranius inhabited Tyre, and he invented huts constructed of reeds and rushes and the papyrus. And he fell into enmity with his brother Usus, who was the inventor of clothing for the body which he made of the skins of the wild beasts which he could catch. And when there were violent storms of rain and wind, the trees about Tyre being rubbed against each other, took fire, and all the forest in the neighborhood was consumed. And Usus, having taken a tree and broken off its boughs, was the first who dared to venture on the sea. And he consecrated two pillars to fire and wind, and worshipped them, and poured out upon them the blood of the wild beasts he took in hunting, and when these men were dead, those that remained consecrated to them rods, and worshipped the pillars, and held anniversary feasts in honor of them. And in times long subsequent to these were born of the race of Hypsiranius, Agrius and Haluus, the inventors of the arts of hunting and fishing, from whom huntsmen and fishermen derive their names. Of these were begotten two brothers who discovered iron and the forging thereof. One of these called Chrysa, who is the same with Hephaestus, exercised himself in words, and charms and divinations, and he invented the hook, and the bait, and the fishing line, and boats of a light construction. He was the first of all men that sailed. Wherefore he was worshipped after his death as a god, under the name of Diomicius. And it is said that his brothers invented the art of building walls with bricks. Afterwards, of this race were born two youths, one of whom was called Technites, and the other was called Gainas or Tokthan. These discovered the method of mingling stubble with the loam of bricks, and of baking them in the sun. They were also the inventors of tiling. By these were begotten others, of whom one was named Agris, the other Agraris or Agrotes, of whom in Phoenicia there was a statue held in the highest veneration, and a temple drawn by yokes of oxen, and at Byblos he is called, by way of eminence, the greatest of the gods. These added to the houses, courts and porticos and crypts, husbandmen, and such as hunt with dogs, derive their origin from these. They are called also Aleti, and Titans. From these were descended Amminus and Magus, who taught men to construct villages and tend flocks. By these men were begotten Mesa and Sydyc, that is, well-freed and just, and they found out the use of salt. From Mesa descended Taordus, who invented the writing of the first letters, him the Egyptians called Thoa, the Alexandrians Thoith, and the Greeks Hermes. But from Sydyc descended the Dioscuri, or Kabiri, or Corybantes, or Samothraces. These, he says, first built a ship complete. From these descended others, who were the discoverers of medicinal herbs and of the cure of poisons and of charms. Contemporary with these was one Eliun, called Hypsistus, the Most High, and his wife named Beruth, and they dwelt about Byblos. By these was begotten Epigeus or Autochthon, whom they afterwards called Uranus, heaven, so that from him that element, which is over us, by reason of its excellent beauty, is named heaven, and he had a sister of the same parents, and she was called Ge, earth, and by reason of her beauty the earth was called by the same name. Hypsistus, the father of these, having been killed in a conflict with wild beasts, was consecrated, and his children offered libations and sacrifices unto him. But Uranus, succeeding to the kingdom of his father, contracted a marriage with his sister Ge, and had by her 4 sons, Ilus who is called Cronus, and Daedalus, and Dagon, which signifies Sidon, bread corn, and Atlas. But by other wives Uranus had much issue, at which Ge, being vexed and jealous of Uranus, reproached him so that they parted from each other. Nevertheless Uranus returned to her, again by force whenever he thought proper, and having laid with her, again departed. He attempted also to kill the children whom he had by her, but Ge often defended herself with the assistance of auxiliary powers. But when Cronus arrived at man's estate, acting by the advice and with the assistance of Hermes Trismegistus, who was his secretary, he opposed himself to his father Uranus, that he might avenge the indignities which had been offered to his mother. And to Cronus were born children, Persephone and Athena, the former of whom died a virgin, but, by the advice of Athena and Hermes, Cronus made a scimitar and a spear of iron. Then Hermes addressed the allies of Cronus with magic words, and wrought in them a keen desire to make war against Uranus in behalf of Ge. And Cronus having thus overcome Uranus in battle, drove him from his kingdom, and succeeded him in the imperial power. In the battle was taken a well-beloved concubine of Uranus who was pregnant, and Cronus bestowed her in marriage upon Dagon, and, whilst she was with him, she was delivered of the child which she had conceived by Uranus, and called his name Demarus. After these events Cronus surrounded his habitation with a wall, and founded Byblos, the first city of Phoenicia. Afterwards Cronus, having conceived a suspicion of his own brother Atlas, by the advice of Hermes, threw him into a deep cavern in the earth, and buried him. At this time the descendants of the Dioscuri, having built some light and other more complete ships, put to sea, and being cast away over against Mount Cassius, there consecrated a temple. But the auxiliaries of Ilus, who is Cronus, were called Elohim, as it were, the allies of Cronus, being so called after Cronus. And Cronus, having a son called Sardadus, dispatched him with his own sword, because he held him in suspicion, and with his own hand deprived his child of life. And in like manner he cut off the head of his own daughter, so that all the gods were astonished at the disposition of Cronus. But in process of time, whilst Uranus was still in banishment, he sent his daughter Astarte, being a virgin, with 2 other of her sisters, Rhea and Dion, to cut off Cronus by treachery, but Cronus took the damsels and married them notwithstanding they were his own sisters. When Uranus understood this, he sent Imamine and Mora with other auxiliaries to make war against Cronus, but Cronus gained the affections of these also, and detained them with himself. Moreover, the god Uranus devised Betulia, contriving stones that moved as having life. And by Astarte Cronus had 7 daughters called Titanides, or Artemides. By Rhea also he had 7 sons, the youngest of whom was consecrated from his birth. Also by Dion he had daughters, and by Astarte again he had 2 other sons, Pothos and Eros. And Dagon, after he had found out bread corn and the plough, was called Zeusorotrius. To Sydyc, who was called the Just, one of the Titanides bare Asclepius, and to Cronus there were born also in Perea 3 sons, Cronus bearing the same name with his father, and Zeusbelus and Apollo. Contemporary with these were Pontus and Typhon, and Nereus the father of Pontus. From Pontus descended Sidon, who by the excellence of her singing first invented the hymns of odes or praises, and Poseidon. But to Demarus was born Melicarthus, who is also called Heracles. Uranus then made war against Pontus, but afterwards relinquishing the attack he attached himself to Demarus, when Demarus invaded Pontus, but Pontus put him to flight, and Demarus vowed a sacrifice for his escape. In the 32nd year of his power and reign, Iolus, who is Cronus, having laid an ambuscade for his father Uranus in a certain place situated in the middle of the earth, when he had got him into his hands, dismembered him over against the fountains and rivers. There Uranus was consecrated, and his spirit was separated, and the blood of his parts flowed into the fountains and the waters of the rivers, and the place, which was the scene of this transaction, is showed even to this day. Then our historian, after some other things, goes on thus. But Astarte called the greatest, and Demarus named Zeus, and Adotus, who is entitled the king of gods, reigned over the country by the consent of Cronus, and Astarte put upon her head, as the mark of her sovereignty, a bull's head, and travelling about the habitable world, she found a star falling through the air, which she took up, and consecrated in the holy island of Tyre, and the Phoenicians say that Astarte is the same as Aphrodite. Moreover, Cronus, visiting the different regions of habitable world, gave to his daughter Athena the kingdom of Attica, and when there happened a plague with a great mortality, Cronus offered up his only begotten son as a sacrifice to his father Uranus, and circumcised himself, and compelled his allies to do the same, and not long afterwards he consecrated after his death another of his sons, called Muth, whom he had by Rhea. This Muth the Phoenicians esteemed the same as Death and Pluto. After these things, Cronus gave the city of Byblos to the goddess Baltis, which is Dione, and Berytus to Poseidon, and to the Cabri, who were husbandmen and fishermen, and they consecrated the remains of Pontus at Berytus. But before these things the god Taurodus, having portrayed Uranus, represented also the countenances of the gods Cronus and Dagon, and the sacred characters of the elements. He contrived also for Cronus the ensign of his royal power, having 4 eyes in the parts before and in the parts behind, 2 of them closing as in sleep, and upon the shoulders 4 wings, 2 in the act of flying, and 2 reposing as at rest. And the symbol was, that Cronus whilst he slept was watching, and reposed whilst he was awake. And in like manner with respect to the wings, that he was flying whilst he rested, yet rested whilst he flew. But for the other gods there were 2 wings only to each upon his shoulders, to intimate that they flew under the control of Cronus, and there were also 2 wings upon the head, the one as a symbol of the intellectual part, the mind, and the other for the senses. And Cronus, visiting the country of the south, gave all Egypt to the god Taurodus, that it might be his kingdom. These things, says he, the Cabri, the 7 sons of Sydyc, and their 8th brother Asclepius, first of all set down in the records in obedience to the commands of the god Taurodus. All these things the son of Thabian, the first hierophant of all among the Phoenicians, allegorized and mixed up with the occurrences and accidents of nature and the world, and delivered to the priests and prophets, the superintendents of the mysteries, and they, perceiving the rage for these allegories increase, delivered them to their successors, and to foreigners, of whom one was Isirus, the inventor of the 3 letters, the brother of Chnahu, is called the first Phoenician. Euseb. Priap Evan. Libai c. 10. Of the mystical sacrifice of the Phoenicians. It was the custom among the ancients, in times of great calamity, in order to prevent the ruin of all, for the rulers of the city or nation to sacrifice to the avenging deities the most beloved of their children as the price of redemption. They who were devoted this purpose were offered mystically. For Cronus, whom the Phoenicians call Illinois, and who after his death was deified and instated in the planet which bears his name, when king, had by a nymph of the country called Ainobred an only son, who on that account is styled Iad, for so the Phoenicians still call an only son, and when great dangers from war beset the land he adorned the altar, and invested this son with the emblems of royalty, and sacrificed him. Euseb. Priap Evan. Libai c. 10. Lib 4. Of the serpent. Taurodus first attributed something of the divine nature to the serpent and the serpent tribe, in which he was followed by the Phoenicians and Egyptians. For this animal was esteemed by him to be the most inspirited of all the reptiles, and of a fiery nature, inasmuch as it exhibits an incredible celerity, moving by its spirit without either hands, or feet, or any of those external members, by which other animals effect their motion. And in its progress it assumes a variety of forms, moving in a spiral course, and darting forward with whatever degree of swiftness it pleases. It is moreover long-lived, and has the quality not only of putting off its old age, and assuming a second youth, but of receiving at the same time an augmentation of its size and strength. And when it has fulfilled the appointed measure of its existence, it consumes itself, as Taurodus has laid down in the sacred books, upon which account this animal is introduced in the sacred rites and mysteries. Euseb. Priap Evan. Libai c. 10. Fragments of Chaldean history, Berossus, from Alexander Polyhisto of the Cosmogony and Deluge. Berossus, in the first book of his history of Babylonia, informs us that he lived in the age of Alexander the son of Philip. And he mentions that there were written accounts, preserved at Babylon with the greatest care, comprehending a period of above 15 myriads of years, and that these writings contained histories of the heaven and of the sea, of the birth of mankind and of the kings, and of the memorable actions which they had achieved. And in the first place he describes Babylonia as a country situated between the Tigris and the Euphrates, that it abounded with wheat, and barley, and ochris, and sesame, and that in the lakes were produced the roots called gonra, which are fit for food, and in respect to nutriments similar to barley. That there were also palm trees and apples, and a variety of fruits, fish also and birds, both those which are merely of flight, and those which frequent the lakes. He adds that those parts of the country which bordered upon Arabia were without water and barren, but that the parts which lay on the other side were both hilly and fertile. At Babylon there was in these times a great resort of people of various nations, who inhabited Chaldea, and lived in a lawless manner like the beasts of the field. In the first year there appeared, from that part of the Erythraean Sea which borders upon Babylonia, an animal destitute 19 of reason, by name Oans, whose whole body, according to the account of Apollodorus, was that of a fish, that under the fish's head he had another head, with feet also below, similar to those of a man, subjoined to the fish's tail. His voice too, and language, was articulate and human, and a representation of him is preserved even to this day. This being was accustomed to pass the day among men, but took no food at that season, and he gave them an insight into letters and sciences and arts of every kind. He taught them to construct cities, to found temples, to compile laws, and explained to them the principles of geometrical knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of the earth, and showed them how to collect the fruits. In short, he instructed them in everything which could tend to soften manners and humanize their lives. From that time, nothing material has been added by way of improvement to his instructions. And when the sun had set, this being Oans, retired again into the sea, and passed the night in the deep, for he was amphibious. After this there appeared other animals like Oans, of which Berossus proposes to give an account when he comes to the history of the kings. Moreover Oans wrote concerning the generation of mankind and of their civil polity, and the following is the purport of what he said: There was a time in which there existed nothing but darkness and an abyss of waters, wherein resided most hideous beings, which were produced of a twofold principle. There appeared men, some of whom were furnished with 2 wings, others with 4, and with 2 faces. They had one body but 2 heads, the one that of a man, the other of a woman, and likewise in their several organs both male and female. Other human figures were to be seen with the legs and horns of goats, some had horses' feet, while others united the hind quarters of a horse with the body of a man, resembling in shape the hippocentaurs. Bulls likewise were bred there with the heads of men, and dogs with 4-fold bodies, terminated in their extremities with the tails of fishes, horses also with the heads of dogs, men too and other animals with the heads and bodies of horses and the tails of fishes. In short, there were creatures in which were combined the limbs of every species of animals. In addition to these, fishes, reptiles, serpents, with other monstrous animals, which assumed each other's shape and countenance. Of all which were preserved delineations in the temple of Belus at Babylon. The person, who presided over them, was a woman named Omeroka, which in the Chaldean language is Thalath, 20 in Greek Thalassa, the sea, but which might equally be interpreted the moon. All things being in this situation, Belus came, and cut the woman asunder, and of one half of her he formed the earth, and of the other half the heavens, and at the same time destroyed the animals within her. 21 All this, he says, was an allegorical description of nature. 4. The whole universe consisting of moisture, and animals being continually generated therein, the deity above mentioned took off his own head, upon which the other gods mixed the blood, as it gushed out, with the earth, and from thence were formed men. On this account it is that they are rational, and partake of divine knowledge. This Belus, by whom they signify Jupiter, 22 divided the darkness, and separated the heavens from the earth, and reduced universe to order. But the animals, not being able to bear the prevalence of light, died. Belus upon this, seeing a vast space unoccupied, though by nature fruitful, commanded one of the gods to take off his head, and to mix the blood with the earth, and from thence to form other men and animals, which should be capable of bearing the air. 23 Belus formed also the stars, and the sun, and the moon, and the 5 planets. Such, according to Polyhista Alexander, is the account which Berossus gives in his first book. In the second book was contained the history of the 10 kings of the Chaldeans, and the periods of the continuance of each reign, which consisted collectively of 120 sari, or 432,000 years, reaching to the time of the deluge. For Alexander, enumerating the kings from the writings of the Chaldeans, after the 9th Ardates, proceeds to the 10th, who is called by them Xisuthros, in this manner. After the death of Ardates, his son Xisuthros reigned 18 Sari. In his time happened a great deluge, the history of which is thus described. The deity, Cronus, appeared to him in a vision, and warned him that upon the 15th day of the month Decius there would be a flood, by which mankind would be destroyed. He therefore enjoined him to write a history of the beginning, procedure, and conclusion of all things, and to bury it in the city of the sun at Sippara, and to build a vessel, and take with him into it his friends and relations, and to convey on board everything necessary to sustain life, together with all the different animals, both birds and quadrupeds, and trust himself fearlessly to the deep. Having asked the deity whither he was to sail, he was answered, 24, to the gods, upon which he offered up a prayer for the good of mankind. He then obeyed the divine admonition, and built a vessel 5 stadia in length and 2 in breadth. Into this he put everything which he had prepared, and last of all conveyed into it his wife, his children, and his friends. After the flood had been upon the earth, and was in time abated, Xisuthros sent out birds from the vessel, which, not finding any food, nor any place whereupon they might rest their feet, returned to him again. After an interval of some days, he sent them forth a second time, and they now returned with their feet tinged with mud. He made a trial a third time with these birds, but they returned to him no more, from whence he judged that the surface of the earth had appeared above the waters. He therefore made an opening in the vessel, and upon looking out found that it was stranded upon the side of some mountain, upon which he immediately quitted it with his wife, his daughter, and the pilot. Xisuthros then paid his adoration to the earth, and having constructed an altar, offered sacrifices to the gods, and, with those who had come out of the vessel with him, disappeared. They, who remained within, finding that their companions did not return, quitted the vessel with many lamentations, and called continually on the name of Xisuthros. Him they saw no more, but they could distinguish his voice in the air, and could hear him admonish them to pay due regard to religion, and likewise informed them that it was upon account of his piety that he was translated to live with the gods, that his wife and daughter, and the pilot, had obtained the same honor. To this he added, that they should return to Babylonia, and, as it was ordained, search for the writings at Sippara, which they were to make known to all mankind, moreover that the place, wherein they then were, was the land of Armenia. The rest having heard these words, offered sacrifices to the gods, and taking a circuit, journeyed towards Babylonia. The vessel being thus stranded in Armenia, some part of it yet remains in the Corcyraean 25 mountains of Armenia, and the people scrape off the bitumen, with which it had been outwardly coated, and make use of it by way of an alexipharmic and amulet. And when they returned to Babylon, and had found the writings at Sippara, they built cities, and erected temples, and Babylon was thus inhabited again. Sinsel. Chron 28. Euseb. Chron 5. 8. Berossus, from Apollodorus of the Chaldean kings. This is the history which Berossus has transmitted to us. He tells us that the first king was Elorus of Babylon, a Chaldean. He reigned 10 Sari, and afterwards Elaparus, and Amylon who came from Pantibibulon, then Ammonon the Chaldean, in whose time appeared the Musaris Oans the Anadotus from the Erythraean Sea. But Alexander Polyhista, anticipating the event, has said that he appeared in the first year, but Apollodorus says that it was after 40 Sari. Abydenus, however, makes the second Anadotus appear after 26 Sari. Then succeeded Megalaris from the city of Pantibibulon, and he reigned 18 Sari, and after him Daeanus the shepherd from Pantibibulon reigned 10 Sari. In his time, he says, appeared again from the Erythraean Sea a fourth Anadotus, having the same form with those above, the shape of a fish blended with that of a man. Then reigned Euetorachus from Pantibibulon, for the term of 18 Sari. In his days there appeared another personage from the Erythraean Sea like the former, having the same complicated form between a fish and a man, whose name was Odocan. All these, says Apollodorus, related particularly and circumstantially whatever Oans had informed them of. Concerning these Abydenus has made no mention. Then reigned Amempsinus, a Chaldean from Laranchi, and he being the 8th in order reigned 10 Sari. Then reigned Oceats, a Chaldean, from Laranchi, and he reigned 8 Sari. And upon the death of Oceats, his son Xisuthros reigned 18 Sari. In his time happened the great deluge. So that the sum of all the kings is 10, and the term which they collectively reigned 120 Sari. Sinsel. Chron 39. Euseb. Chron 5. Berossus, from Abydenus of the Chaldean kings and the deluge. So much concerning the wisdom of the Chaldeans. It is said that the first king of the country was Elorus, and that he gave out a report that God had appointed him to be the shepherd of the people. He reigned 10 Sari. Now Osiris is esteemed to be 3,600 years, and Nero's 600, and Asosis 60. After him Elaparus reigned 3 Sari, to him succeeded Amillarus from the city of Pantibibulon, who reigned 13 Sari. In his time came up from the sea a second Anadotus, a semi-demon very similar in his form to Oannes. After Amillarus reigned Amnon 12 Sari, who was of the city of Pantibibulon. Then Megalaris of the same place reigned 18 Sari. Then Daus, the shepherd, governed for the space of 10 Sari. He was of Pantibibulon. In his time 4 double-shaped personages came up out of the sea to land, whose names were Euedicus, and Eugamus, and Eubulus, and Anamentus. Afterwards in the time of Euodorescus appeared another Anadaphus. After these reigned other kings, and last of all Sisithras, so that in the whole, the number amounted to 10 kings, and the term of their reigns to 120 Sari. And among other things not irrelative to the subject, he continues thus concerning the deluge. After Euodorescus some others reigned, and then Sisithras. To him the deity Cronus foretold that on the 15th day of the month Decius there would be a deluge of rain, and he commanded him to deposit all the writings whatever which were in his possession in the city of the sun in Sitpara. Sisithras, when he had complied with commands, sailed immediately to Armenia, and was presently inspired by God. Upon the 3rd day after the cessation of the rain Sisithras sent out birds, by way of experiment, that he might judge whether the flood had subsided. But the birds passing over an unbounded sea, without finding any place of rest, returned again to Sisithras. This he repeated with other birds. And when upon the 3rd trial he succeeded, for the birds then returned with their feet stained with mud, the gods translated him from among men. With respect to the vessel, which yet remains in Armenia, it is a custom of the inhabitants to form bracelets and amulets of its wood. Sincel. Cron 38 Euseb. Priap Evan. Lib 9 Euseb. Cron 5. 8 The Tower of Babel. They say that the first inhabitants of the earth, glorying in their own strength and size, and despising the gods, undertook to raise a tower whose top should reach the sky, in the place in which Babylon now stands. But when it approached the heaven, the winds assisted the gods, and overthrew the work upon its contrivers, and its ruins are said to be still at Babylon. And the gods introduced a diversity of tongues among men, who till that time had all spoken the same language, and a war arose between Cronus and Titan. The place in which they built the tower is now called Babylon on account of the confusion of the tongues, for confusion is by the Hebrews called Babel. Euseb. Priap Evan. Lib 9. Sincel. Cron 44. Euseb. Cron 13. Berossus, from Josephus, etc. The various readings to some of the following extracts would, if they were all given, exceed the text in size. I have selected those which appear to be most material. Of Abraham. After the deluge, in the 10th generation, was a certain man among the Chaldeans renowned for his justice and great exploits, and for his skill in the celestial sciences. Euseb. Priap Evan. Lib 9. Of Nabonassar. From the reign of Nabonassar only are the Chaldeans, from whom the Greek mathematicians copy, accurately acquainted with the heavenly motions, for Nabonassar collected all the mementos of the kings prior to himself, and destroyed them, that the enumeration of the Chaldean kings might commence with him. Sincel. Cron 207. Of the destruction of the Jewish temple. He, Nabopolassar, sent his son Nabuchodonosor with a great army against Egypt, and against Judea, upon his being informed that they had revolted from him, and by that means he subdued them all, and set fire to the temple that was at Jerusalem, and removed our people entirely out of their own country, and transferred them to Babylon, and our city remained in a state of desolation during the interval of 70 years, until the days of Cyrus king of Persia. He then says that this Babylonian king conquered Egypt, and Syria, and Phoenicia, and Arabia, and exceeded in his exploits all that had reigned before him in Babylon and Chaldea. Joseph. Control Apion. Lib 1. C. 19. Of Nebuchadnezzar. When Nabopolassar his Nebuchadnezzar's father heard that the governor, whom he had set over Egypt and the provinces of Cilicia and Phoenicia, had revolted, he was determined to punish his delinquencies, and for that purpose entrusted part of his army to his son Nabuchodonosor, who was then of mature age, 26, and sent him forth against the rebel, and Nabuchodonosor engaged and overcame him, and reduced the country again under his dominion. And it came to pass that his father, Nabopolassar, was seized with a disorder which proved fatal, and he died in the city of Babylon, after he had reigned 29 years. Nabuchodonosor, as soon as he had received intelligence of his father's death, set in order the affairs of Egypt and the other countries, and committed to some of his faithful officers the captives he had taken from the Jews and Phoenicians and Syrians and the nations belonging to Egypt, that they might conduct them with that part of the forces which had heavy armor, together with the rest of his baggage, to Babylonia. In the meantime, with a few attendants he hastily crossed the desert to Babylon. When he arrived there he found that his affairs had been faithfully conducted by the Chaldeans, and that the principal person among them had preserved the kingdom for him, and he accordingly obtained possession of all his father's dominions. And he distributed the captives in colonies in the most proper places of Babylonia, and adorned the temple of Belus and the other temples in a sumptuous and pious manner, out of the spoils which he had taken in this war. He also rebuilt the old city, and added another to it on the outside, and so far completed Babylon, that none, who might besiege it afterwards, should have it in their power to divert the river, so as to facilitate an entrance into it, and he effected this by building 3 walls about the inner city, and 3 about the outer. Some of these walls he built of burnt brick and bitumen, and some of brick only. When he had thus admirably fortified the city, and had magnificently adorned the gates, he added also a new palace to those in which his forefathers had dwelt, adjoining them, but exceeding them in height and splendor. Any attempt to describe it would be tedious, yet notwithstanding its prodigious size and magnificence it was finished within 15 days. In this palace he erected very high walks, supported by stone pillars, and by planting what was called a pensile paradise and replenishing it with all sorts of trees, he rendered the prospect an exact resemblance of a mountainous country. This he did to gratify his queen, because she had been brought up in Media and was fond of a mountainous situation. Joseph. Control App Ion. Lib 1. C. 19. Sinsel. Cron 220. Euseb. Priap Evan. Lib 9. Of the Chaldean kings after Nebuchadnezzar. Nabuchodonosor, whilst he was engaged in building the above-mentioned wall, fell sick, and died after he had reigned 43 years, whereupon his son Avilmerodachus succeeded him in his kingdom. His government however was conducted in an illegal and improper manner, and he fell a victim to a conspiracy which was formed against his life by Neriglossaurus, his sister's husband, after he had reigned about 2 years. Upon his death Neriglossaurus, the chief of the conspirators, obtained possession of the kingdom and reigned 4 years. He was succeeded by his son Laborasorchodas, who was but a child, reigned 9 months. For his misconduct he was seized by conspirators and put to death by torture. After his death, the conspirators assembled, and by common consent placed the crown upon the head of Nabonidus, a man of Babylon and one of the leaders of the insurrection. It was in his reign that the walls of the city of Babylon which defend the banks of the river were curiously built with burnt brick and bitumen. In the 17th year of the reign of Nabonidus, Cyrus came out of Persia with a great army, and having conquered all the rest of Asia, advanced hastily into the country of Babylonia. As soon as Nabonidus perceived he was advancing to attack him, he assembled his forces and opposed him, but was defeated, and fled with a few of his adherents and was shut up in the city of Borsippas. Upon this Cyrus took Babylon and gave orders that the outer walls should be demolished, because the city appeared of such strength as to render a siege almost impracticable. From thence he marched to Borsippas to besiege Nabonidus, but Nabonidus delivered himself into his hands without holding out the place. He was therefore kindly treated by Cyrus, who provided him with an establishment in Carmania, but sent him out of Babylonia. Nabonidus accordingly spent the remainder of his life in that country, where he died. Joseph. Control App, Lib 1. C. 20. Euseb. Priap Evan. Lib 9. Of the Feast of Siscia. Berossus, in the first book of his Babylonian history, says that in the 11th month, called Luz, is celebrated in Babylon the Feast of Siscia for 5 days, in which it is the custom that the masters should obey their domestics, one of whom is led round the house, clothed in a royal garment, and him they call Zoganes. Athenaeus, Lib 14. Megasthenes, from Aberdeenus of Nebuchadnezzar. Aberdeenus, in his History of the Assyrians, has preserved the following fragment of Megasthenes, who says that Nabuchodonosor, having become more powerful than Hercules, invaded Libya and Iberia, and when he had rendered them tributary, he extended his conquests over the inhabitants of the shores upon the right of the sea. It is moreover related by the Chaldeans that as he went up into his palace he was possessed by some god, and he cried out and said, O Babylonians, I, Nabuchodonosor, foretell unto you a calamity which must shortly come to pass, which neither Belus my ancestor, nor his queen Beltis, have power to persuade the fates to turn away. A Persian mule shall come, and by the assistance of your gods shall impose upon you the yoke of slavery, the author of which shall be a Mede, the vain glory of Assyria. Before he should thus betray my subjects, oh, that some sea or whirlpool might receive him, and his memory be blotted out forever, or that he might be cast out to wander through some desert, where there are neither cities nor the trace of men, a solitary exile among rocks and caverns where beasts and birds alone abide. But for me, before he shall have conceived these mischiefs in his mind, a happier end will be provided. When he had thus prophesied, he expired, and was succeeded by his son Avilmaruchus, who was slain by his kinsman Neriglazares, and Neriglazares left Labasaurascus his son, and when he also had suffered death by violence, they crowned Nabonidus, who had no connection with the royal family, and in his reign Cyrus took Babylon, and granted him a principality in Carmania. And concerning the rebuilding of Babylon by Nabuchodonosor, he writes thus: It is said that from the beginning all things were water, called the sea, that Belus caused this state of things to cease, and appointed to each its proper place, and he surrounded Babylon with a wall, but in process of time this wall disappeared, and Nabuchodonosor walled it in again, and it remained so with its brazen gates until the time of the Macedonian conquest. And after other things he says, Nabuchodonosor having succeeded to the kingdom, built the walls of Babylon in a triple circuit in 15 days, and he turned the river Armachale, a branch of the Euphrates, and the Acracanus, and above the city of Sitpara he dug a receptacle for the waters, whose perimeter was 40 parasangs, and whose depth was 20 cubits, and he placed gates at the entrance thereof, by opening which they irrigated the plains, and these they call ekatognomons, sluices. And he constructed dikes against the eruptions of the Erythraean Sea, and built the city of Teredon to check the incursions of the Arabs, and he adorned the palaces with trees, calling them hanging gardens. Euseb. Priap, Evan. Lib 10. Euseb. Chron 49. Supplemental fragments and extracts illustrative of the Chaldean history of the Ark, from Nicolaus Damascenus. 27 There is above Minyas in the land of Armenia a very great mountain which is called Baris, 28 To which, it is said, that many persons retreated at the time of the deluge, and were saved, and that one in particular was carried thither in an ark, and was landed on its summit, and that the remains of the vessel were long preserved upon the mountain. Perhaps this was the same individual of whom Moses the legislator of the Jews has made mention. Jos and Jud. A3. Euseb. Priap, Evan. 9 Of the dispersion, from Hestius. The priests who escaped took with them the implements of the worship of the Enalian Jove, and came to Sennaar in Babylonia. But they were again driven from thence by the introduction of a diversity of tongues, upon which they founded colonies in various parts, each settling in such situations as chance or the direction of God led them to occupy. Jos and Jud. A.C. 4. Euseb. Priap, Evan. 9 Of the Tower of Babel, from Alexander Polyhista. Sibyl says that when all men formerly spoke the same language, some among them undertook to erect a large and lofty tower, that they might climb up into heaven. But God 29 sending forth a whirlwind, confounded their design, and gave to each tribe a particular language of its own, which is the reason that the name of that city is Babylon. After the deluge lived Titan and Prometheus, when Titan undertook a war against Cronus. 30 Sync. 44 Jos and Jud. A.C. 4 Eus. Priap, Evan. 9 Of the Tower and Titanian War, from the Sibylline Oracles. 31 But when the judgments of the Almighty God were ripe for execution, when the tower rose to the skies upon Assyria's plain, and all mankind one language only knew, a dread commission from on high was given to the fell whirlwinds, which with dire alarms beat on the tower, and to its lowest base shook it convulsed. And now all intercourse, by some occult and overruling power, ceased among men. By utterance they strove perplexed and anxious to disclose their mind, but their lip failed them, and in lieu of words produced a painful babbling sound. The place was thence called Babel, by repostate crew named from the event. Then severed far away they sped uncertain into the realms unknows, thus kingdoms rose, and the glad world was filled. She then mentions Cronus, Titan and Japetus, and the 3 sons of the patriarch governing the world in the 10th generation after the deluge. Thus, the triple division of the earth is afterwards mentioned, over which each of the patriarchs ruled in peace. Then the death of Noah, and lastly the war between Cronus and Titan. Of Scythism and Hellenism, from Epiphanius. 32 The parents of all the heresies and the prototypes from which they derive their names, and from which all other heresies originate, are these 4 primary ones. The first is barbarism, 33, which prevailed without a rival from the days of Adam through 10 generations to the time of Noah. It is called barbarism because men had no rulers nor submitted to any particular discipline of life, but as each thought proper to prescribe to himself, so he was at liberty to follow the dictates of his own inclination. The second is Scythism, which prevailed from the days of Noah and thence downwards to the building of the tower and Babylon, and for a few years subsequently to that time, that is to the days of Phalak and Regal. But the nations which incline upon the borders of Europe continued addicted to the Scythic heresy, and the customs of the Scythians to the age of Thera, and afterwards, of this sect also were the Thracians. The third is Hellenism, which originated in the days of Serach with the introduction of idolatry, and as men had hitherto followed each some demonolatrous superstition of his own, they were now reduced to a more established form of polity, and to the rites and ceremonies of idols. And the followers of this began with the use of painting, making likenesses of those whom they had formerly honored, either kings or chiefs, or men who in their lives had performed actions which they deemed worthy of record, by strength or excellence of body. The Egyptians and Babylonians and Phrygians and Phoenicians were the first propagators of this superstition of making images and of the mysteries, from whom it was transferred to the Greeks from the time of Cecrops downwards. But it was not till afterwards and at a considerable interval that Cronus and Rhea, Zeus and Apollo, and the rest were esteemed and honored as gods. The following extract is given in Epiphanius preceding the above. And from the times of Thera the father of Abraham, they introduced images and all the errors of idolatry, honoring their forefathers and their departed predecessors with effigies which they fashioned after their likeness. They first made these effigies of earthenware, but afterwards according to their different arts they sculptured them in stone, and cast them in silver and gold, and wrought them in wood, and all kinds of different materials. Of Hellenism, from Cedrenus. Of the tribe of Japhet was born Serach, who first introduced Hellenism and the worship of idols. For he and those who concurred with him in opinion honored their predecessors, whether warriors or leaders, or characters renowned during their lives for valor or virtue, with columnar statues, as if they had been their progenitors, and tended to them a species of religious veneration as a kind of gods and sacrificed. But after this their successors, overstepping the intention of their ancestors that they should honor them as their progenitors and the inventors of good things with monuments alone, honored them as heavenly gods and sacrificed to them as such. And the following was the form of their canonization: they inscribed their names after their decease in their sacred books and established a festival to each at certain seasons, saying that their souls had departed to the islands of the blessed and were never condemned or burnt with fire. Of the Tower of Babel and Abraham, from Eupolemus. The city of Babylon owes its foundation to those who were saved from the catastrophe of the deluge. They were the giants, and they built the tower which is noticed in history. But the tower being overthrown by the interposition of God, the giants were scattered over all the earth. He says moreover that in the 10th generation in the city Camarina of Babylonia, which some call the city Uri, and which signifies a city of the Chaldeans, the 13th in descent lived Abraham, of a noble race and superior to all others in wisdom, of whom they relate that he was the inventor of astrology and the Chaldean magic, and that on account of his eminent piety he was esteemed by God. It is further said that under the directions of God he removed and lived in Phoenicia, and there taught the Phoenicians the motions of the sun and moon and all other things, for which reason he was held in great reverence by their king. Euseb. Priap, Evan. 9. Of Abraham, from Nicolaus Damascenus. Abram was king of Damascus, and he came thither as a stranger with an army from that part of the country which is situated above Babylon of the Chaldeans, but after a short time he again emigrated from this region with his people and transferred his habitation to the land, which was then called Cananea, but now Judea, together with all the multitude which had increased with him, of whose history I shall give an account in another book. The name of Abram is well known even to this day in Damascus, and a village is pointed out which is still called the house of Abram. Euseb. Priap, Evan. 9. Jos and Jud. 1:7. Of Belus, from Eupolemus. For the Babylonians say that the first was Belus, who is the same as Cronus. And from him descended Belus and Chanaan, and this Chanaan was the father of the Phoenicians. Another of his sons was Chum, who is called by the Greeks Asbelus, father of the Ethiopians, and the father of Mesraim, the father of the Egyptians. The Greeks say, moreover, that Atlas was the discoverer of astrology. Eus. Prev. Lib 9. From Thallus. Thallus makes mention of Belus, the king of the Assyrians, and Cronus the Titan, and says that Belus, with the Titans, made war against Zeus and his compeers, who are called gods. He says, moreover, that Gyges was smitten and fled to Tartessus. According to the history of Thales, Belus preceded the Trojan War 322 years. Theoph. Ad Aut. 281, 282. Of the Assyrian Empire, from Tejas. In like manner all the other kings succeeded, the son receiving the empire from his father, being altogether 30 in their generations to Sardanapalus. In his time the empire passed to the Medes from the Assyrians, having remained with them upwards of 136,034 years, according to the account of Tejas the Nidian in his second book. Diod. Sic. 2. Page 77. From Diodorus Siculus. In the manner above related, the empire of the Assyrians, after having continued from Ninus 30 descents and more than 1,400 years, was finally dissolved by the Medes. Diod. Sic. 2. Page 81. From Herodotus. The Medes were the first who began the revolt from the Assyrians after they had maintained the dominion over Upper Asia for a period of 520 years. Libai c. 95. Of Nabopolassar, from Alexander Polyhista. 35 Nabopolassar, whom Alexander Polyhista calls Sardanapalus, sent to Astyages the satrap of Media and demanded his daughter Amuites in marriage for his son Nabuchodonosor. He was the commander of the army of Sarachus king of the Chaldeans, and, having been sent upon some expedition, turned his arms against Sarachus and marched against the city of Ninus, Nineveh. But Sarachus, confounded by his advance, set fire to his palace and burnt himself in it. And Nabopolassar obtained the empire of the Chaldeans. He was the father of Nabuchodonosor. Euseb. Chron. 46. Of the Chaldean and Assyrian kings, from Alexander Polyhista. In addition to the above, Polyhista continues thus: after the deluge of Exius held possession of the country of the Chaldeans during a period of 4 Neri. And he was succeeded by his son Comus Belus, who held the empire 4 Neri and 5 Susi. But from the time of Xisuthros and the deluge to that at which the Medes took possession of Babylon, there were altogether 86 kings. Polyhista enumerates and mentions each of them by name from the volume of Berossus. The duration of the reigns of all which kings comprehends a period of 33,091 years. But when their power was thus firmly established, the Medes suddenly levied forces against Babylon to surprise it, and to place upon the throne kings chosen from among themselves. He then gives the names of the Median kings, 8 in number, who reigned during the period of 224 years, and again 11 kings during years. Then 49 kings of the Chaldeans 458 years. Then 9 kings of the Arabians 245 years. After all these successive periods of years he states that Semiramis reigned over the Assyrians. And again minutely enumerates the names of 45 kings, assigning to them a term of 526 years. After whom, he says there was a king of the Chaldeans, whose name was Phulus, of whom also the historical writings of the Hebrews make mention under the name of Phulus, Pul, who they say invaded the country of the Jews. EU. Chron. 39. Of Sennacherib, from Alexander Polyhista. After the reign of the brother of Sennacherib, Asaizes reigned over the Babylonians, and when he had governed for the space of 30 days, he was slain by Merodach Baladanus, who held the empire by force during 6 months, and he was slain and succeeded by a person named Elibas. But in the 3rd year of his reign Sennacherib king of the Assyrians levied an army against the Babylonians, and in a battle, in which they were engaged, routed, and took him prisoner with his adherents, and commanded them to be carried into the land of the Assyrians. Having taken upon himself the government of the Babylonians, he appointed his son Asordanius their king, and he himself retired again into Assyria. When he received a report that the Greeks had made a hostile descent upon Cilicia, he marched against them and fought with them a pitched battle, in which, though he suffered great loss in his own army, he overthrew them, and upon the spot he erected the statue of himself as a monument of his victory, and ordered his prowess to be inscribed upon it in the Chaldean characters, to hand down the remembrance of it to posterity. He built also the city of Tarsus after the likeness of Babylon, which he called Tharsis. And after enumerating the various exploits of Sennacherib, he adds that he reigned 18 years, and was cut off by a conspiracy which had been formed against his life by his son Arjumusanus. EU. Chron. 42. Of Sennacherib and his successors, from Alexander Polyhista. And after him Pul, according to Polyhista, Sennacherib was king. The Chaldean historian also makes mention of Sennacherib himself, and Asordinus his son, and Merodach Baladanus, as well as Nabuchodonosaurus. And Sinetrim reigned 18 years, and after him his son 8 years. Then reigned Samajas 21 years, and likewise his brother 21 years. Then reigned Nabopolassar 20 years, and after him Nebuchadrezzar 43 years. Therefore, from Sinetrim to Nebuchadrezzar is comprehended a period altogether of 88 years. After Samajas, Sardanapalus the Chaldean reigned 21 years. He sent an army to the assistance of Astyages the Mede, prince and satrap of the family, that he might give the Amahian daughter of Astyages to his son Nebuchadrezzar. Then reigned Nebuchadrezzar 43 years, and he came with a mighty army, and led the Jews and Phoenicians and Syrians into captivity. And after Nebuchadrezzar reigned his son Amilmerodachus 12 years. And after him Neglasaris reigned over the Chaldeans 4 years, and then Nabonidus 17 years. In his reign Cyrus, the son of Cambyses, invaded the country of the Babylonians. Nabonidus went out to give him battle, but was defeated, and betook himself to flight, and Cyrus reigned at Babylon 9 years. He was killed, however, in another battle which took place in the plain of Das. After him reigned Cambyses 8 years, then Darius 36 years, after him Xerxes and the other kings of the Persian line. EU. Akron, pp 41, 42. 44, 45. Of Sennacherib and his successors, from Aberdeenus. At the same time the 25th who was Sennacherib can hardly be recognized among the kings. It was he who subjected the city of Babylon to his power, and defeated and sunk a Grecian fleet upon the coast of Cilicia. He built also a temple at Athens and erected brazen statues, upon which he engraved his own exploits. And he built the city of Tarsus after the plan and likeness of Babylon, that the river Cydnus should flow through Tarsus in the same manner as the Euphrates intersected Babylon. Next in order after him reigned Megillus, who was assassinated by his son Adrammelus, and he also was slain by Axidus, his brother by the same father, but of a different mother, and his army pursued and blockaded in the city of Byzantium. Axidus was the first that levied mercenary soldiers, one of whom was Pythagoras, a follower of the wisdom of the Chaldeans. He also reduced under his dominion Egypt and the country of Calo-Syria, whence came Sardanapalus. 36 After him Sarachus reigned over the Assyrians, and when he was informed that a very great multitude of barbarians had come up from the sea to attack him, he sent Busilosaurus as his general in haste to Babylon. But he, having with a treasonable design obtained Amahian, the daughter of Astyages the prince of the Medes, to be affianced to his son Nebuchadrezzar, marched straightways to surprise the city of Ninus, that is Nineveh. But when Sarachus the king was apprised of all these proceedings, he burnt the royal palace. And Nebuchadrezzar succeeded to the empire and surrounded Babylon with a strong wall. EU. Akron 53. Of Belus and the Assyrian Empire, from Castor. Belus, says Castor, was king of the Assyrians, and under him the Cyclops assisted Jupiter with thunderbolts and lightnings in his contest with the Titans. At that time there were kings of the Titans, one of whom was Ogyges. After a short digression he proceeds to say that the giants, in their attempted inroad upon the gods, were slain by the assistance of Hercules and Dionysus, who were themselves of the Titan race. Belus, whom we have mentioned above, after his death was esteemed a god. After him, Ninus reigned over the Assyrians 52 years. He married Semiramis, who, after his decease, reigned over the Assyrians 42 years. Then reigned Zames, who was Ninya's. Then he enumerates each of the successive Assyrian kings in order, and mentions them all, down to Sardanapalus, by their respective names, whose names, and the length of their reigns, we shall also give presently. Castor mentions them in his canon in the following words. We have first digested into a canon the kings of the Assyrians, commencing with Belus, but since we have no certain tradition respecting the length of his reign, we have merely set down his name, and commenced the chronological series from Ninus, and have concluded it with another Ninus, who obtained the empire after Sardanapalus, that in this manner the whole length of the time, as well as of the reigns of each king, might be plainly set forth. Thus it will be found, that the complete sum of the years amounts to 1280. EUs. Page 81. Of the Assyrian Empire, from Velleius and Aemilius Sura. The Asiatic Empire was subsequently transferred from the Assyrians, who had held it 1070 years, to the Medes, from this time, for a period of 870 years. For Sardanapalus, the king of the Assyrians, a man wallowing in luxury, being the 33rd from Ninus and Semiramis, the founders of Babylon, from whom the kingdom had passed in a regular descent from father to son, was deprived of his empire, and put to death by Arbaces the Mede. Aemilius Sura also, in his Annals of the Roman People, says that the Assyrian princes extended their empire over all nations. They were succeeded by the Medes, then by the Persians, then by the Macedonians, and shortly afterwards by two kings Philip and Antiochus, of Macedonian origin, who, not long after the destruction of Carthage, were conquered by the Romans, who then obtained the empire of the world. To this time, from the beginning of the reign of Ninus, king of the Assyrians, who first obtained the empire, there has elapsed a period of 1995 years. Histai c. 6. Of the Chaldean observations, from Plinius. Anticlides relates that letters were invented in Egypt by a person whose name was Menon, 15 years before Pharonius, the most ancient king of Greece, and he endeavors to prove it by the monuments. On the contrary, Epigenes, a writer of first-rate authority, informs us that among the Babylonians were preserved observations of the stars inscribed upon baked tiles extending to a period of 720 years. Berosus and Chritodemus, who are the most moderate in their calculations, nevertheless extend the period of the observations to 480 years. Whence may be inferred the eternal use of letters among them. Lib 7. c. 56. From Cicero. We must also contemn the Babylonians and those who, in the region of Caucasus, pretend to have observed the heavens and courses of the stars. We must condemn them, I say, of folly, or of vanity, or of impudence, who assert that they have preserved upon monuments observations extending back during an interval of 470,000 years. De Diving. The Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster cause God, Father, Mind, Fire Monad, Duad, Triad. 37:1. 38 But God is he that has the head of a hawk. He is the first, indestructible, eternal, unbegotten, indivisible, dissimilar, the dispenser of all good, incorruptible, the best of the good, the wisest of the wise. He is the father of equity and justice, self-taught, physical, and perfect, and wise, and the only inventor of the sacred philosophy. Euseb. Priap, Evan. Lib I c. 10. 39 Theurgists assert that he 40 is a god, and celebrate him as both older and younger, as a circulating and eternal god, as understanding the whole number of all things moved in the world, and moreover infinite through his power and of a spiral form. Z or T. Proc in Tim 244. Te. 3. The mundane god, eternal, boundless, young and old, of a spiral form. 4. For eternity, 41 according to the oracle, is the cause of never-failing life, of unwearied power, and unsluggish energy. Te. 5. Hence this stable God is called by the gods silent, and is said to consent with mind, and to be known by souls through mind alone. T. Proc in Theol 321. Te. 6. The Chaldeans call the god Dionysus or Bacchus, Iao in the Phoenician tongue, instead of the intelligible light, and he is often called Sabaoth, signifying that he is above the seven poles, that is the demiurgus. Lyd. Demens. 83 Te. 7. Containing all things in the one summit of his own hypaxis, he himself subsists wholly beyond. T. Procol. In Theol 212. Te. 8. Measuring and bounding all things. T. Proc in PLTH 386. Te. 9. For nothing imperfect circulates from a paternal principle. Z. Cell. 38. Plet. 10. The Father held not forth fear but infused persuasion. Z. Plat. 11. The Father has hastily withdrawn himself, but has not shut up his own fire in his intellectual power. Z. Cell. 30. Plet. 33. 12. Such is the mind which is there energizing before energy. That it has not gone forth but abode in the paternal depth and in the addendum according to divinely nourished silence. T. Proc in Tim 167. 13. All things are the progeny of one fire. The Father perfected all things and delivered them over to the second mind, whom all nations of men call the first. Z. Cell. 24. Plet. 30. 14. And of the mind which conducts the empyrean world. T. Dan. Deprin 15. What the mind says, it says by understanding. Z. Cell. 35. 16. Power is with them, but mind is from him. T. Proc in Plat. Th 365. 17. The mind of the Father riding on attenuated rulers which glitter with the furrows of inflexible and implacable fire. T. Proc in Crat. Te. 18. After the paternal conception I the soul reside, a heat animating all things. For he placed mind in soul and soul in dull body, the Father of gods and men so placed them in ours. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 124. 19. Natural works coexist with the intellectual light of the Father. For it is the soul which adorned the great heaven and which adorns it after the Father. But her horns are established on high. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 106. 20. The soul, being a bright fire, by the power of the Father, remains immortal, and is mistress of life, and fills up many of the recesses of the world. Z. Cell. 28. Plet. 11. 21. The channels being intermixed, she performs the works of incorruptible fire. Z or T. Proc in PL Polit. 399. 22. For the fire which is first beyond did not shut up his power in matter by works but by mind, for the framer of the fiery world is the mind of mind. T. Proc in Theol. 333. In Tim. 157. 23. Who first sprung from mind clothing fire with fire, binding them together that he might mingle the fountainous craters, while he preserved the flower of his own fire. T. Proc in Palm. 24. Thence a fiery whirlwind drawing the flower of glowing fire, flashing into the cavities of the worlds, for all things from thence begin to extend downwards their admirable rays. T. Proc in Theol. Plat. 171, 172. 25. 42. The monad is there first where the paternal monad subsists. T. Proc in EUC. 27, 26. The monad is extended which generates two. T. Proc in EUC. 27, 27. For the duad sits by this and glitters with intellectual sections to govern all things and to order each. T. Proc in Plat. 376, 28. The mind of the Father said that all things should be cut into three, his will assented, and immediately all things were cut. T. Proc in Palm. 29. The mind of the eternal Father said into three, governing all things by mind. T. Proc in Tim. 30. The Father mingled every spirit from this triad. Lyd. Demen. 20. Te. 31. All things are governed in the bosoms of this triad. Lyd. Demen. 20. Te. 32. All things are governed and subsist in these three. T. Proc in I. Alsib. 33. For you may conceive that all things serve these three principles. T. Dam. Deprin. 34. From these flows the body of the triad, being pre-existent, not the first, but that by which things are measured. Z or T. Anonymous. 35. And there appeared in it virtue, and wisdom, and multiscient truth. Z or T. Anonymous. 36. For in the whole world shineth a triad, over which a monad rules. T. Dam. In Palm. 37. The first is the sacred course. But in the middle air, the third the other which cherisheth the earth in fire. Z or T. Anonymous. 38. Abundantly animating light, fire, ether, worlds. Z or T. Simp. In Phys. 143. Ideas. 43. Intelligibles, intellectuals, anjas, sinoches, teletaki, fountains, principles, Hecate and diamonds. 39. The mind of the Father made a jarring noise, understanding by unwearied counsel omniform ideas, which flying out from one fountain they sprung forth, for from the Father was the will and the end winking sad smiley by which they are connected with the Father according to alternate life from several vehicles, but they were divided, being by intellectual fire distributed into other intellectuals. For the king previously placed before the multiform world an intellectual, incorruptible pattern, the print of whose form is promoted through the world, according to which things the world appeared beautified with all various ideas, of which there is one fountain, from this the others rush forth distributed, and separated about the bodies of the world, and are borne through its vast recesses like swarms turning themselves on all sides in every direction. They are intellectual conceptions from the paternal fountain, partaking abundantly the flower of fire in the point of restless time, but the primary self-perfect fountain of the Father poured forth these primogenial ideas. Z or T. Proc in Palm. 40. These being many ascend flashingly into the shining worlds, and in them are contained three summits. T. Dam. In Palm. 41. They are the guardians of the works of the Father and of the one mind, the intelligible. T. Proc in Th. Plat. 205. 42. 44 All things subsist together in the intelligible world. T. Dan. De Prin Te. 43 But all intellect understands the deity, for intellect is not without the intelligible, and the intelligible does not subsist apart from intellect. Z. Or T. Dan. 44 For intellect is not without the intelligible, it does not subsist apart from it. Z. Or T. Proc. Th. Platt. 172, 45. By intellect he contains the intelligibles, but introduces the soul into the worlds. 46 By intellect he contains the intelligibles, but introduces sense into the worlds. T. Proc. in Crat. 47 For the paternal intellect, which understands intelligibles and adorns things ineffable, has sowed symbols through the world. T. Proc. in Crat. 48 This order is the beginning of all section. T. Dan. De Prin 49 The intelligible is the principle of all section. T. Dan. De Prin 50 The intelligible is food to that which understands. T. Dan. De Prin 51 The oracles concerning the orders exhibits it prior to heaven as ineffable and add it as mystic silence. T. Proc. in Crat. Te. 52 The oracle calls the intelligible causes swift and asserts that proceeding from the Father, they run to him. T. Proc. in Crat. Te. 53 45 Those natures are both intellectual and intelligible, which, themselves possessing intellection, are the objects of intelligence to others. T. Proc. Th. Platt. 179, 54. The intelligible angels themselves understand from the Father, by ineffable counsels being moved so as to understand. Z. Cell. 41, Platt. 3L. 55. Because it is the operator, because it is the giver of life-bearing fire. Because it fills the life-producing bosom of Hecate. And it instills into the Cenoches the enlivening strength of fire endued with mighty power. T. Proc. in Tim. 128. 56 He gave to his own whirlwinds to guard the summits, mingling the proper force of his own strength in the Cenoches. T. Dan. De Prin 57 But likewise as many as serve the material Cenoches. T. 58 The teletarchs are comprehended in the Cenoches. T. Dan. De Prin 59 46 Rhea the fountain and river of the blessed intellectuals having first received the powers of all things in her ineffable bosom pours forth perpetual generation upon everything. T. Proc. in Crat. Te. 64 It is the bound of the paternal depth and the fountain of the intellectuals. T. Dan. De Prin 61 For he is a power of circumlucid strength, glittering with intellectual sections. T. Dan. 62 He glitters with intellectual sections, but has filled all things with love. T. Dan. 63 To the intellectual whirlwinds of intellectual fire all things are subservient, through the persuasive counsel of the Father. T. Proc. in Palm. 64 Oh how the world has inflexible intellectual rulers. 65 The center of Hecate corresponds with that of the Fathers. T. 66 From him leap forth all implacable thunders and the whirlwind-receiving bosoms of the all-splendid strength of the Father-begotten Hecate, and he who begirds the flower of fire and the strong spirit of the poles, all fiery beyond. T. Proc. in Crat. 67 Another fontal which leads the empyreal world. Z. or T. Proc. in Tim. 68 The fountain of fountains and the boundary of all fountains. T. Dan. De Prin. 69 Under two minds the life-generating fountain of souls is comprehended. T. Dan. De Prin. 70 47 Beneath them lies the principle of the immaterials. Z. or T. Dan. In Palm. 71 Father-begotten light, for he alone having gathered from the strength of the Father the flower of mind has the power of understanding, the paternal mind, to instill into all fountains and principles the power of understanding, and of always remaining in a ceaseless revolution. T. Proc. in Tim. 242 72 All fountains and principles will round and always remain in a ceaseless revolution. Z. or T. Proc. in Palm. 73. The principles which have understood the intelligible works of the Father he has clothed in sensible works and bodies, being the intermediate links standing to communicate between the Father and matter, rendering apparent the images of unapparent natures and inscribing the unapparent in the apparent frame of the world. Z or T. Dan. Deprin 74. Typhon, Echidna, and Python, being the progeny of Tartarus and earth, which is conjoined with heaven, form as it were a certain Chaldaic triad, which is the inspector of the whole disordered fabrication. T. Olymp in Fade, Te. 75. Irrational diamonds derive their subsistence from the aerial rulers, wherefore the oracle says, being the charioteer of the aerial, terrestrial, and aquatic dogs. T. Olymp. In Fade, Te. 76. The aquatic, when applied to divine natures, signifies a government inseparable from water, and hence the oracle calls the aquatic gods water walkers. T. Proc in Tim 270. Te. 77. There are certain aquatic daemons whom Orpheus called Nereides in the more elevated exhalations of water, such as appear in this cloudy air, whose bodies are sometimes seen, as Zoroaster thinks, by more acute eyes, especially in Persia and Africa. T. Fic. Darim. 123. Te. Particular souls. Soul, life, man. 78. These things the Father conceived, and the mortal was animated for him. T. Proc in Tim 336. 79. For the Father of gods and men placed the mind in soul, but in body he placed you. 80. The paternal mind has sowed symbols in the souls. Z. Cell. 26. Plet. 681. Having mingled the vital spark from two according substances, mind and divine spirit, as a third to these he added holy love, the venerable charioteer uniting all things. Lyd. Demen. 3. Te. 82. Filling the soul with profound love. Z or T. Proc in PL Theol 4. 83. The soul of men will in a manner clasp God to herself. Having nothing mortal she is wholly inebriated from God, for she glories in the harmony under which the mortal body exists. Z. Cell. 17. Plat. 1084. The more powerful souls perceive truth through themselves and are of a more inventive nature. Such souls are saved through their own strength, according to the oracle. T. Proc in ALC Te. 85. The oracle says, ascending souls sing a paean. Z or T. Olin. In Fade Te. 86. Of all souls those certainly are superlatively blessed which are poured forth from heaven to earth, and they are happy, and have ineffable stamina, as many as proceed from thy splendid self, O King, or from Jove himself, under the strong necessity of mythos. Z or T. Science de Inson. 153. 87. The souls of those who quit the body violently are most pure. Z. Cell. 27. 88. The ungirders of the soul, which give her breathing, are easy to be loosed. Z. Cell. 32. Plet. 8. 89. For though you see this soul manumitted, the Father sends another, that the number may be complete. Z or T. 90. Understanding the works of the Father they avoid the shameless wing of fate, they are placed in God, drawing strong torches, descending from the Father, from which, as they descend, the soul gathers of the empyreal fruits the soul-nourishing flower. Z or T. Proc in Tim 321. 91. This animastic spirit, which blessed men have called the pneumatic soul, becomes a god, an all-various demon, and an image, and the soul in this suffers her punishments. The oracles, too, accord with this account, for they assimilate the employment of the soul in Hades to the delusive visions of a dream. Z or T. Science. De Inson. Page 139. Te. 92. One life with another, from the distributed channels. Passing from above through the opposite part through the center of the earth, and the fifth the middle, another fiery channel, where the life-beaming fire descends as far as the material channels. Z. Or T. 93. Moisture is a symbol of life, hence Plato, and the gods before Plato, call it, the soul, at one time the liquid of the whole of vivification, and at another time a certain fountain of it. Z. Proc in Tim 318. Te. 94. O man, of a daring nature, thou subtle production. Z. Cell. 12. Plet. 21. 95. For thy vessel the beasts of the earth shall inhabit. Z. Cell. 36 Plat. 7 96. Since the soul perpetually runs and passes through all things in a certain space of time, which being performed, it is presently compelled to run back again through all things and unfold the same web of generation in the world, according to Zoroaster, who thinks that as often as the same causes return, the same effects will in like manner be returned. Z. Fisenderim. And 129. Te. 97. According to Zoroaster, in as the ethereal vestment of the soul perpetually revolves. Z. Fisenderim. And 131. Te. 98. The oracles delivered by the gods celebrate the essential fountain of every soul, the empyrean, the ethereal, and the material. This fountain they separate from the whole vivific goddess 48, from whom also suspending the whole of fate, they make two series, the one animastic, or belonging to the soul, and the other belonging to fate. They assert that the soul is derived from the animastic series, but that sometimes it becomes subservient to fate. When passing into an irrational condition of being, it becomes subject to fate instead of providence. Z or T. Proc. de Provapi. Fabra. 8 486. Te. Matter. Matter, the world and nature. 99. The matrix containing all things. T. 100. Holy division and indivisible. 101. Thence abundantly springs forth the generation of multifarious matter. T. Proc. in Tim. 118. 102. These frame indivisibles and sensibles and corporiforms and things destined to matter. T. Dan. De Prin. 103. The fontal nymphs and all the aquatic spirits and the terrestrial, aerial, and glittering recesses are the lunar riders and rulers of all matter, of the celestial, the starry, and that which lies in the abysses. Lyd. Page 32. Te. 104. Evil, according to the oracle, is more frail than an entity. Z or T. Proc. de Prov. Te. 105. We learn that matter pervades the whole world, as the gods also assert. Z or T. Proc. Tim. 142. 106. All divine natures are incorporeal, but bodies are bound in them for your sakes. Bodies not being able to contain incorporeals by reason of the corporeal nature in which you are concentrated. Z or T. Proc. in P.L. Pollitt. 359. 107. For the paternal self-begotten mind understanding his work sewed in all the fiery bond of love, that all things might continue loving for an infinite time. That the connected series of things might intellectually remain in all the light of the Father, that the elements of the world might continue their course in love. T. Proc. in Tim. 155. 108. The Maker who, self-operating, framed the world, and there was another mass of fire, all these things he produced self-operating, that the body of the world might be conglobed, that the world might be manifest, and not appear membranous. Z or T. Proc. in Tim. 154. 109. For he assimilates himself, professing to cast around him the form of the images. 110. For it is an imitation of mind, but that which is fabricated has something of body. Z or T. Proc. in Tim. 87. 111. But projecting into the worlds, through the rapid menace of the Father, the venerable name with a sleepless revolution. Z or T. Proc. in Crat. 112. The ethers of the elements therefore are there. Z or T. Olymp. In Fade. Te. 113. The oracles assert that the impression of characters and of other divine visions appear in the ether. Z or T. Simp. In Phys. 144. Te. 114. In this the things without figure are figured. Z or T. Simp. In Phys. 143. 115. The ineffable and effable impressions of the world. 116. And the light-hating world, and the winding currents under which many are drawn down. Z or T. Proc. in Tim. 339. 117. He makes the whole world of fire, and water, and earth, and all-nourishing ether. Z or T. 118. Placing earth in the middle, but water in the cavities of the earth, and air above these. Z or T. 119. He fixed a great multitude of inerratic stars, not by a laborious and evil tension, but with a stability void of wandering. Forcing the fire to the fire. Z or T. Proc. in Tim. 280. 120. For the Father congregated the seven firmaments of the world, circumscribing the heaven with a convex figure. Z or T. Dan. In Palm. 121. He constituted a septenary of erratic animals. Z or T. 122. Suspending their disorder in well-disposed zones. Z or T. 123. He made them 6 in number, and for the 7th he cast into the midst the fire of the sun. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 280. 124. The centre from which all lines which way soever are equal. Z or T. Proc in EUC. 43. 125. And that the swift sun may come as usual about the centre. Z or T. Proc in Plat. TH 317. 126. Eagerly urging itself towards the centre of resounding light. T. Proc in Tim. 236. 127. And the great sun and the bright moon. 128. For his hairs appear like rays of light ending in a sharp point. T. Proc in PL Paul 387. 129. And of the solar circles, and of the lunar clashings, and of the aerial recesses, the melody of the ether, and of the sun, and of the passages of the moon, and of the air. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 257. 130. The most mystic of discourses inform us that the wholeness of him, the sun, is in the supermundane orders, for there a solar world and a total light subsist, as the oracles of the Chaldeans affirm. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 264. Te. 131. The more true sun measures all things by time, being truly a time of time, according to the oracle of the gods concerning it. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 249. Te. 132. The disk of the sun is carried in the starless much above the inerratic sphere, and hence he is not in the middle of the planets but of the 3 worlds, according to the telestic hypothesis. Z or T. July. Orit. V. 334. Te. 133. The sun is a 49 fire, the channel of fire, and the dispenser of fire. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 141. 134. 50. Hence Cronus. The sun assessor beholding the pure pole. 135. The ethereal course and the vast motion of the moon and the aerial fluxes. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 257. 136. O ether, sun, spirit of the moon, leaders of the air. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 257. 137. And the wide air, and the lunar course, and the pole of the sun. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 257. 138. For the goddess brings forth the great sun and the bright moon. 139. She collects it, receiving the melody of the ether, and of the sun, and of the moon, and of whatsoever things are contained in the air. 140. Unwearied nature rules over the worlds and works, that heaven drawing downward might run an eternal course, and that the other periods of the sun, moon, seasons, night, and day, might be accomplished. Z or T. Proc in Tim. 4. And 323. Te. 141. Immense nature is exalted about the shoulders of the goddess. T. Proc in Tim. 4. 142. The most celebrated of the Babylonians, together with Arstanes and Zoroaster, very properly call the starry spheres herds, whether because these alone among corporeal magnitudes are perfectly carried about a centre, or in conformity to the oracles, because they are considered by them as in a certain respect the bonds and collectors of physical reasons, which they likewise call in their sacred discourses herds, and by the insertion of a gamma, angels. Wherefore the stars which preside over each of these herds are considered demons similar to the angels, and are called archangels, and they are 7 in number. Z. Anonymous in Theologumenus Arithmeticis. Te. 143. Zoroaster calls the congruities of material forms to the reasons of the soul of the world, divine elements. Z. Fic. David. Coel. Comp 519. Te. Magical and philosophical precepts. 144. Direct not thy mind to the vast measures of the earth, for the plant of truth is not upon ground. Nor measure the measures of the sun, collecting rules, for he is carried by the eternal will of the Father, not for your sake. Dismiss the impetuous course of the moon, for she runs always by the work of necessity. The progression of the stars was not generated for your sake. The wide aerial flight of birds is not true, nor the dissections of the entrails of victims, they are all mere toys, the basis of mercenary fraud. Flee from these if you would open the sacred paradise of piety where virtue, wisdom, and equity are assembled. Z. Cell. 4. 145. Stoop not down to the darkly splendid world in which continually lies a faithless depth, and Hades cloudy, squalid, delighting in images unintelligible, precipitous, winding, a blind profundity always rolling, always espousing an opicus, idle, breathless body. Z or T, Science de Insen. 140-146. Stoop not down, for a precipice lies below the earth, drawing under a descent of 7 steps, beneath which is the throne of dire necessity. Z. Cell. 6. Plet. 2. 147. Leave not the dross of matter on a precipice, for there is a portion for the image in a place ever splendid. Z. Cell. 1. 2. Plet. 14. Sin. 140-148. Invoke not the self-conspicuous image of nature. Z. Cell. 15. Plet. 23-149. Look not upon nature, for her name is fatal. Z. Proc in Plat. Th 143. 150. It becomes you not to behold them before your body is initiated, since by always alluring, they seduce the souls of the initiated. Z or T. Proc in Alsib. 151. Bring her 51 not forth, lest in departing she retain something. Z. Cell. 3. Plet. 15. 152. Defile not the spirit, nor deepen a superficies. Z. Cell. 19. Plet. 13. 153. Enlarge not thy destiny. Z. Cell. 37. Plet. 4. 154. Not hurling, according to the oracle, a transcendent foot towards piety. Z or T. Dan. Invit. Isidori AP. Swid. Tay. 155. Never change barbarous names, for there are names in every nation given from God, having unspeakable efficacy in the mysteries. Z or T. Cell. 7. Nisif. 156. Go not out when the lictor passes by. Z. Pick. Concal, Tay. 157. Let fiery hope nourish you in the angelic region. Z or T. Olin. In Fade, Proc in Alsip. 158. The fire-glowing conception has the first rank, for the mortal who approaches the fire shall have light from God, for to the persevering mortal, the blessed immortals are swift. Z or T. Proc in Tim, 65. 159. The gods exhort us to understand the preceding form of light. Z or T. Proc in Krat. Tay. 160. It becomes you to hasten to the light and the rays of the Father, from whence was sent to you a soul endued with much mind. Z. Cell. 33. Plet. 6. 161. Seek paradise. Z. Cell. 20. Plet. 12. 162. Learn the intelligible, for it subsists beyond the mind. Z. Cell. 41. Plet. 27. 163. There is a certain intelligible which it becomes you to understand with the flower of mind. Z. Cell. 31. Plet. 28. 164. But the paternal mind receives not her 52 will until she has gone out of oblivion and pronounced the word, assuming the memory of the pure paternal symbol. Z. Cell. 39. Plet. 5. 165. To these he gave the ability of receiving the knowledge of light, those that were asleep he made fruitful from his own strength. Z or T. Sin. De Insen. 135, 166. 53. It is not proper to understand that intelligible with vehemence, but with the extended flame of an extended mind measuring all things except that intelligible. But it is requisite to understand this, for if you incline your mind you will understand it not earnestly, but it becomes you to bring with you a pure and inquiring eye, to extend the void mind of your soul to the intelligible, that you may learn the intelligible, because it subsists beyond mind. T. Dan. 167. You will not understand it, as when understanding some particular thing. T. Dan. 168. You, who understand, know the supermundane paternal depth. Z or T. Dan. 169. Things divine are not attainable by mortals who understand body, but only as many as are lightly arrive at the summit. Z or T. Proc in Krat. Tay. 170. Having put on the complete vigor of resounding light. With triple strength fortifying the soul and the mind, he must put into the mind the symbol of variety and not walk dispersedly on the empyreal channels, but collectively. 171. For being furnished with every kind of armor and armed, he is similar to the goddess. T. Proc in PLTH 324. Te. 172. Explore the river of the soul, whence, or in what order, having become a servant to body, you may again rise to the order from which you descended, joining works to sacred reason. Z. Cell. 5. Plet. 1. 173. Every way to the unfashioned soul extend the reins of fire. Z. Cell. 11. Plet. 24. 174. Let the immortal depth of your soul lead you, but earnestly extend your eyes upwards. Z. Cell. 11. Plet. 20. 175. Man, being an intelligible mortal, must bridle his soul, that she may not incur terrestrial infelicity but be saved. Lyd. De Men. 2. Te. 176. If you extend the fiery mind to the work of piety, you will preserve the flexible body. Z. Cell. 22. Plet. 16. 177. The telestic life, through a divine fire, removes all the stains, together with every foreign and irrational nature, which the spirit of the soul attracted from generation, as we are taught by the oracle to believe. Z. or T. Procol. In Tim. 331. Te. 178. The oracles of the gods declare that, through purifying ceremonies, not the soul only, but bodies themselves become worthy of receiving much assistance and health, for, say they, the mortal vestment of bitter matter will, by this means, be preserved. And this, the gods, in an exhortatory manner, announce to the most holy of Thugists. Z. or T. July. Orit. V. page 334. Te. 179. We should flee, according to the oracle, the multitude of men going in a herd. Z. or T. Proc in IALC. Te. 180. Who knows himself knows all things in himself. Z. 1 Pic. Page 211. Te. 181. The oracles often give victory to our own choice, and not to the order alone of the mundane periods. As, for instance, when they say, on beholding yourself, fear. And, again, believe yourself to be above body, and you are. And, still further, when they assert that our voluntary sorrows germinate in us as the growth of the particular life we lead. Z. or T. Proc. de Prof. page 483. Te. 182. These things are revolve in the recluse temples of my mind. 183. As the oracle, therefore, says, God is never so much turned away from man, and never so much sends him new paths, as when he makes assent to the most divine of speculations, or works in a confused or disordered manner, and, as it adds, with unhallowed lips, or unwashed feet. For of those who are thus negligent, the progressions are imperfect, the impulses are vain, and the paths are dark. Z. or T. Procol. In Palm. Te. 184. Not knowing that every god is good, you are fruitlessly vigilant. Z. or T. Proc. in PL Paul 355. Te. 185. Theurgists fall not so as to be ranked among the herd that are in subjection to fate. Lyd. De Men. Te. 186. That the number 9 is divine, receiving its completion from 3 triads, and preserving the summits of theology according to the Chaldaic philosophy, as Porphyry informs us. Lyd. Page 121. Te. 187. In the left sides of Hecate is a fountain of virtue, which remains entire within, not sending forth its virginity. Z. Cell. 13. Plet. 9. 188. And the earth bewails them even to their children. Z. Cell. 21. Plet. 3. 189. The Furies are the constrainers of men. Z. Cell. 25. Plet. 19. 190. Lest being baptized in the furies of the earth and in the necessities of nature, as some one of the gods says, it should perish. Z. or T. Proc. in Theol. 297. Te. 191. Nature persuades us that there are pure demons, even the blossoms of evil matter are useful and good. Z. Cell. 16. Plet. 18. 192. As yet 3 days ye shall sacrifice, and no longer. Z. Pic. Konkel, Te. 193. In the first place, the priest, who governs the works of fire, must sprinkle with the cold water of the loud-sounding sea. Z or T. Proc in Krat. Te. 194. Energize about the Hecatic Strophilos. Z. Cell. 9. Nicep. 195. When you shall see a terrestrial demon approaching, exclaim, and sacrifice the stone Miserin. Z. Cell. 40. 196. If you often invoke me, you shall see all things darkening, for neither does the convex bulk of heaven then appear, nor do the stars shine, the light of the moon is hidden, the earth stands not still, but all things appear in thunders. Z. Cell. 10. Plet. 22. 197. From the cavities of the earth leap forth terrestrial dogs, showing no true sign to mortal man. Z. Cell. 23. Plet. 17. 198. A similar fire flashingly extending itself into the waves of the air, or even unfigured fire, whence an antecedent voice, or light rich, glittering, resounding, revolved. But when you see a horse glittering with light, or a boy, carried on the swift back of a horse, fiery, or clothed in gold, or naked, or shooting with a bow, or standing upon horseback, Z, or T, Proc, in PL Pollet, 380. 199. When you behold a sacred fire without form shining flashingly through the depths of the whole world, hear the voice of fire. Z. Cell. 14. Plet. 25. Fragments of the Hermetic, Orphic, Pythagorean, and other cosmogonies and theogonies from the ancient Hermetic books. Before all things that essentially exist, and before the total principles, there is one God, prior to the first God and King, remaining immovable in the solitude of his unity, for neither is the intelligible mixed with him, nor any other thing. He is established, the exemplar of the God who is the Father of himself, self-begotten, the only Father, and who is truly good. For he is something greater, and the first, the fountain of all things, and the root of all primary intelligible existing forms. But out of this one, the self-ruling God made himself shine forth, wherefore he is the Father of himself, and self-ruling, for he is the first principle and God of gods. He is the monad from the one, before essence, yet the first principle of essence, for from him is entity and essence, on which account he is celebrated as the chief of the intelligibles. These are the most ancient principles of all things, which Hermes places first in order, before the ethereal and empyrean gods and the celestial. But, according to another division, he, Hermes, places the god Mf54 as the ruler of the celestial gods, and says that he is intellect understanding himself, and converting other intelligences to himself. And before this he places the indivisible one, which he calls the first effigies, and denominates him Eichton, in whom, indeed, is the first intellect and the first intelligible, and this one is venerated in silence. Besides these, other rulers are imagined to exist, which govern the fabrication of things apparent, for the demiurgic intellect, which properly presides over truth and wisdom, when it proceeds to generation and leads forth into light the inapparent power of the secret reasons, is called Amon, according to the Egyptian tongue, and when it perfects all things not deceptively, but artificially according to truth, Tha. But the Greeks changed the word Tha into Hephaestus, looking only to the artificial, regarded as the producer of good things, it is called Osiris, and according to its other powers and attributes it as different appellations. There is also, according to them, another certain principle presiding over all the elements in a state of generation, and over the powers inherent in them, 4 of which are male and 4 female, and this principle they attribute to the sun. There is yet another principle of all nature regarded as the ruler over generation, and this they assign to the moon. They divide the heavens also into 2 parts, or into 4, or 12, or 36, or the doubles of these. They attribute to them leaders more or less in number, and over them they place one whom they consider superior to them all. Hence, from the highest to the last, the doctrine of the Egyptians concerning the principles inculcates the origin of all things from one, with different gradations to the many, which, the many, are again held to be under the supreme government of the one, and the nature of the boundless is considered entirely subservient to the nature of the bounded, and the supreme unity the cause of all things. And God produced matter from the materiality of the separated essence, which being of a vivific nature, the demiurgus took it, and fabricated from it the harmonious and imperturbable spheres, but the dregs of it he employed in the fabrication of generated and perishable bodies. Jambal. Sect. 8 c. 2. 3. From the modern Hermetic books. The glory of all things is God, and deity, and divine nature. The principle of all things existing is God, and the intellect, and nature, and matter, and energy, and fate, and conclusion, and renovation. For there were boundless darkness in the abyss and water and a subtle spirit, intellectual in power, existing in chaos. But the holy light broke forth, and the elements were produced from among the sand of a watery essence. Cern. Sec. Lib 3. From Hor Apollo. The world appears to them, the Egyptians, to consist of a masculine and feminine nature. And they engrave a scarabaeus for Athena and a vulture for Hephaestus. For these alone of all the gods they consider as both male and female in their nature. From Chairman. Chairman and others believe that nothing existed prior to the sensible worlds, and they place among the foremost of such opinions the sentiments of the Egyptians, who hold that there are no other gods than those which are called the planets and the constellations of the zodiac, and such as these. They say, also, that the honors paid to the 10 great gods and those which are called heroes, whose names appear in the almanacs, are nothing else than charms for the cure of evils and observations of the risings and settings of the stars and prognostications of future events. For it seems that they esteem the sun to be the demiurgus, and hold that the legends about Osiris and Isis and all other their mythological fables have reference either to the stars, their appearances and occultations, and the periods of their risings, or to the increase and decrease of the moon, or to the cycles of the sun, or the diurnal and nocturnal hemispheres, or to the river, in short, that everything of the kind relates merely to physical operations and has no connection or reference whatever to incorporeal and living essences properly so called. Most of them, also, suppose that some indissoluble connection exists between our concerns and the motions of the stars, by a kind of necessity which they call destiny, whereby all sublunary things are connected with these gods and depend upon them. Hence they serve and honor them with temples and statues and the like, as the only beings capable of influencing destiny. E.U.s. P.R. Evan. 3 c. 4. Orphic Fragments from ORPHEUS. 55 Zeus is the first. Zeus the Thunderer is the last. Zeus is the head. Zeus is the middle, and by Zeus all things were fabricated. Zeus is male, immortal Zeus is female. Zeus is the foundation of the earth and of the starry heaven. Zeus is the breath of all things. Zeus is the rushing of indefatigable fire. Zeus is the root of the sea, he is the sun and moon. Zeus is the king, he is the author of universal life, one power, one demon, the mighty prince of all things, one kingly frame in which this universe revolves, fire and water, earth and ether, night and day, and Metis, counsel, the primeval father, and all delightful Eros, love. All these things are united in the vast body of Zeus. Would you behold his head and his fair face, it is the resplendent heaven, round which his golden locks of glittering stars are beautifully exalted in the air. On each side are the 2 golden taurine horns, the risings and settings, the tracks of the celestial gods, his eyes the sun and the opposing moon, his unfallacious mind the royal incorruptible ether. E.U.s. Prev. 3 Proc. Tim. Aristot. Demund. From Orpheus. First I sung the obscurity of ancient chaos, how the elements were ordered, and the heaven reduced to bound, and the generation of the wide-bosomed earth, and the depth of the sea, and Eros, love, the most ancient, self-perfecting, and of manifold design, how he generated all things and parted them from one another. And I have sung of Cronus so miserably undone, and how the kingdom of the blessed immortals descended to the thunder-loving Zeus. Arch 419. From Orpheus. First, I have sung the vast necessity of ancient chaos and Cronus, who in the boundless tracts brought forth the ether, and the splendid and glorious Eros of a twofold nature, the illustrious father of night, existing from eternity. Whom men call Fans, for he first appeared. I have sung the birth of powerful Brimo, Hecate, and the unhallowed deeds of the earth-born giants, who showered down from heaven their blood, the lamentable seed of generation, from whence sprung the race of mortals, who inhabit the boundless earth forever. Arch v. 12. From Hesiod. Chaos was generated first, and then the wide-bosomed earth, the ever-stable seed of all the immortals that inhabit the snowy peaks of Olympus and the dark aerial Tartarus in the depths of the permeable earth, and Eros, the fairest of the immortal gods, that relaxes the strength of all, both gods and men, and subjugates the mind and the sage will in their breasts. From chaos were generated Erebus and black night, and from night again were generated ether and day, whom she brought forth, having conceived from the embrace of Erebus. And earth first produced the starry heaven equal to herself, that it might enclose all things around herself. Theog. V. 116. From Aristophanes. First was chaos and night, and black Erebus and vast Tartarus, and there was neither earth, nor air, nor heaven, but in the boundless bosoms of Erebus. Night, with her black wings, first produced an aerial egg, from which, at the completed time, sprang forth the lovely Eros, glittering with golden wings upon his back, like the swift whirlwinds. But embracing the dark-winged chaos in the vast Tartarus, he begot our race, the birds, 56, and first brought us to light. The race of the immortals was not, till Eros mingled all things together, but when the elements were mixed one with another, heaven was produced, an ocean, an earth, and the imperishable race of all the blessed gods. Aries top. Aves. 698, Swid. V. Chaos. From Orpheus. Chaos and a vast yawning chasm on every side. Te. Maya, supreme of gods, immortal night, tell me this, how shall I constitute the magnanimous first principles of the immortals? Surround all things with ineffable ether, and place them in the mid-heaven. Proc. Tim. 63. Orphic hymn to Protagonus. I invoke Protagonus, of a double nature, great, wandering through the ether, egg-born, rejoicing in thy golden wings, having the countenance of a bull, the procreator of the blessed gods and mortal men, the renowned light, the far-celebrated Erysipeus, ineffable, occult, impetuous, all-glittering strength, who scatterest the twilight clouds of darkness from the eyes and roamest throughout the world upon the flight of thy wings, who bringest forth the pure and brilliant light, wherefore I invoke thee. As fans, as Priapus the king, and as dazzling fountain of splendor. Come, then, blessed being, full of wisdom and generation, come enjoy to thy sacred, ever-varying mystery. Be present with the priests of thy orgies. From Orpheus. 57. What Orpheus has asserted upon the subject is as follows: from the beginning the ether was manifested in time, evidently having been fabricated by God, and on every side of the ether was the chaos, and gloomy night enveloped and obscured all things which were under the ether. By attributing to night a priority, he intimates the explanation to be, that there existed an incomprehensible nature, and a being supreme above all others and pre-existing, the demiurgus of all things as well. Of the ether itself, and of the night, 58, as of all the creation which existed and was concealed under the ether. Moreover he says, earth was invisible on account of the darkness, but the light broke through the ether, and illuminated the earth and all the material of the creation, signifying by this light, which burst forth through the ether, the before-mentioned being who was supreme above all things, and its name, which Orpheus learnt from the oracle, is Metis, Phans, Erysipeus, which in the common Greek language may be translated will, or counsel, light, life-giver, signifying, when explained, that these three powers of the three names are the one power and strength of the only God, whom no one ever beheld, and of his power no one can have an idea or comprehend the nature. By this power all things were produced, as well incorporeal principles as the sun and moon, and their influences, and all the stars, and the earth and the sea, and all things that are visible and invisible in them. And man, says he, was formed by this God out of the earth, and endued with a reasonable soul, in like manner as Moses has revealed. J. Malala, page 89. Said. Suidas versus Orpheus. From Orpheus. Metis bearing the seed of the gods, whom the blessed inhabitants of Olympus call Phans Protagonus. In Crat. And Metis, the first father, and all-delightful Eros. In Tim. 2:102. Soft Eros and inauspicious Metis. IB 181. Metis bearing the generation of the gods, illustrious Erysipeus. From Orpheus. Orpheus has the following theological speculation in allusion to Phans. Therefore the first god bears with himself the heads of animals, many and single, of a bull, of a serpent, and of a fierce lion, and they sprung from the primeval egg in which the animal is seminally contained. Proc. in Tim. From the ancient theologists. The theologist places around him the heads of a ram, a bull, a lion, and a dragon, and assigns him first both the male and female sex. Female and father is the mighty god Erysipeus. To him also the wings are first given. Proc. in Tim. From the ancient theologists. 59. They, the theologists, assert that night and heaven, Uranus, reigned, and before these their most mighty father, who distributed the world to gods and mortals, over which he first reigned, the illustrious Erysipeus, after whom reigned night, having in her hands the excellent scepter of Erysipeus, after whom heaven, Uranus, who first reigned over the gods after his mother night. From the ancient theologists. In short, that to the power of the Son is to be referred the control and supremacy of all things is indicated by the theologists, who make it evident in the mysteries by the following short invocation. O all-ruling Son, Spirit of the world, Power of the world, Light of the world. Macrub. Saturday Lib IAC 23. Pythagorean fragments from Timus Locris. Thus says Timaeus the Locrian. The causes of all things are two: intellect, of those which are produced according to reason, and necessity, of those which necessarily exist according to the powers of bodies. Of these the first is of the nature of good, and is called God, the principle of such things as are most excellent. Those which are consequent, and concauses rather than causes, may be referred to necessity, and they consist of idea or form, and matter, to which may be added the sensible world, which is as it were the offspring of these two. The first of these is an essence ungenerated, immovable, and stable, of the nature of same, and the intelligible exemplar of things generated which are in a state of perpetual change, and this is called idea or form, and is to be comprehended only by mind. But matter is the receptacle of form, the mother and female principle of the generation of the third essence, for, by receiving the likenesses upon itself, and being stamped with form, it perfects all things, partaking of the nature of generation. And this matter, he says, is eternal, movable, and of its own proper nature, without form or figure, yet susceptible of receiving every form. It is divisible also about bodies, and is of the nature of different. They also call matter, place and situation. These two, therefore, are contrary principles. Idea or form is of the nature of male and father, but matter of the nature of female and mother, and things which are of the third nature are the offspring of the two. Since then there are three natures, they are comprehended in three different ways: idea, which is the object of science, by intellect; matter, which is not properly an object of comprehension, but only of analogy, by a spurious kind of reasoning; but things compounded of the two are the objects of sensation, and opinion or appearance. Therefore, before the heaven was made, there existed in reality idea, and matter, and God the demiurgus of the better nature, and since the nature of elder continuance is more worthy than that of younger novelty and order than of disorder, God in his goodness, seeing that matter was continually receiving form and changing in an unnefarious and disordered manner, undertook to reduce it to order and put a stop to its indefinite changes, by circumscribing it with determinate figure, that there might be corresponding distinctions of bodies, and that it might not be subject to continual variations of its own accord. Therefore he fabricated this world out of all the matter, and constituted it the boundary of essential nature, comprising all things within itself, one, only begotten, perfect, with a soul and intellect. For an animal so constituted is superior to one devoid of soul and intellect. He gave it also a spherical body, for such of all other forms is the most perfect. Since, therefore, it was God's pleasure to render this his production most perfect, he constituted it a God, generated indeed, but indestructible by any other cause than by the God who made it, in case it should be his pleasure to dissolve it. From Plato. You say that, in my former discourse, I have not sufficiently explained to you the nature of the first. I purposely spoke enigmatically, that in case the tablet should have happened with any accident, either by land or sea, a person, without some previous knowledge of the subject, might not be able to understand its contents. This, then, is the explanation. About the King of all things are, and all things are on account of him, and he is the cause of all good things. But the second is about things of the second kind, and the third about things of the third kind. Therefore the human soul, from its earnest desire to know what these things may be, examines those within itself which are akin to them, none of which it possesses in sufficient perfection. Such imperfection, however, is not the case with regard to the king and those natures of which I spoke. Platt. EP 2. Page 312. From Plato. Conjuring the God of all things, the ruler of those which are, and are about to be, and the sovereign father of the ruler and cause. Platt. EP 6. Page 323. From Emilius. Emilius makes the demiurgus triple, and the three intellects the three kings: him that exists, him that possesses, him that beholds. And these are different, therefore the first intellect exists essentially as that which exists. But the second exists as the intelligible in him, but possesses that which is before him, and partakes altogether of that, wherefore it is the second. But the third exists as the intelligible in the second as did the second in the first, for every intellect is the same with its conjoined intelligible, and it possesses that which is in the second, and beholds or regards that which is the first, for by how much greater the remove, by so much the less intimate is that which possesses. These three intellects, therefore, he supposes to be the demiurge, the same with the three kings of Plato and with the three whom Orpheus celebrates under the names of Phans, Uranus and Cronus, though, according to him, the demiurgus is more particularly Phans. Proc. in Tim. 293. From Onomacritus. Onomacritus in the Orphics says that fire and water and earth were the first principles of all things. Sextus. Hyp. 3-4. 136 Phys. 9-5. 6-620. From Ion. This, says Ion, is the beginning of my discourse. All things are three, and nothing more or less, and the virtue of each one of these three is a triad consisting of intellect, power, and chance. From Philoponus. Parmenides holds fire and earth primary principles, but Ion of Chios, the tragedian, placed them after air. Philoponus. From Plutarchus. The moist nature, being the first principle and origin of all things from the beginning, made the three first bodies, earth, air, and fire. Plut. Da. Is. From Ocellus. There are three boundaries: generation, summit, termination. 4. From Ocellus. The first triad consists of beginning, middle, and end. Lyd. Demens. Page 20. From Plato. Some say that all things consist of those which are in the course of generation, those generated, and those about to be generated, the first by nature, the second by art, and the third by chance. Plat. De Leg. X. From Aristoteles. All things are three, for as the Pythagoreans say, the universe and all things are bounded by three, for the end, the middle, and the beginning include the enumeration of everything, and they fulfill the number of the triad. Aristot. De Coelo. A. From Aristoteles. The good and contemplative become so through three things, and these three are nature, habit, and reason. Aristot. Polit. 7. From Damascius. All things, therefore, are three, but not one: hyparxis, power, and energy. Damas. Quaest. c. 39. Cosmogony of the Tyrrhenians. A certain person among them, well versed in these matters, wrote a history, in which he says that God, the demiurgus of all things, for the sake of giving dignity to his productions, was pleased to employ 12,000 years in their creation, and extended these years over 12 divisions, called houses. In the first 1,000 years he created the heaven, the earth; in the second he made all this apparent firmament above us, and called it heaven; in the third, the sea and all the waters in the earth; in the fourth, the great lights, the sun and the moon, together with the stars; in the fifth, every soul of birds and reptiles and quadrupeds, in the air, and in the earth, and in the waters; in the sixth, man. It appears, therefore, that the first 6,000 years were consumed before the formation of man, and during the other 6,000 years the human race will continue, so that the full time shall be completed even to 12,000 years. Swid. V. Tyrrhenia.